Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you here today. My name's Dustin Cormier. Welcome to another episode in this series of How to Rock Astrology. It's my first series that I've been doing since I got this new astrology channel kicking. So, for a little bit more of what I'm all about, feel free to check out this right here. Feel free to check out my website, dustincormier.net, where you can check out and read about my book, Solipsis Eclipse, that I'm very proud of. And this is an example of the gist of my chart, as well as my Chinese symbols, just so you can get a feel for the flow of the energy that I express here. I always like to give a little bit of objectivity to myself, me being the person who is delineating the information that you're hearing. It's always good to be objective about where you're getting your info from, I guess. So, today we are going to be learning about Mars in Gemini as it relates to your sexuality. It's continuing our series about what Mars means to sexuality and how it expresses itself as an adjunct to the sun, the king. Mars is the general to the king, the sun. And so Mars is what helps us to express spontaneously and vigorously what the sun in us wants. And Mars, as its own player in the cosmic schema, has its ways of satisfaction and enjoyment and is important. So, I'm a Vedic astrologer. But I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer, so I go by Western measurements. Anybody who's interested in Veda, I'm trying to kind of bridge the two, because I think that there are things in Vedic that the Western could use, and there are things in Western that the Vedic could use. For more about that, check out more of the stuff on my channel, where I have stuff talking about tropical versus Western versus Vedic. Although they're the same thing. Same science, different philosophy of the data, shall we say. So thank you for coming, folks. Let's learn a little bit about Mars and Gemini. A little scratch in my throat stir. Mars is an interesting place in Gemini. It's actually not the best. Mars is very close to its debilitation point here in Gemini. Basically anything like Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and Virgo are all kind of like the worst places for Mars. This one's not a great one because it's very close, again, to the debilitation point, and Mercury is an enemy to Mars. Now, you have to understand that when you're reading about something like this, it's part of your karma. It's part of the way that you've been expressing your Mars in your life. But it's a necessary evil. You still have to deal with the nature of your Mars. You can't think, oh, my Mars sucks, so I'm just going to run from it, or I'm not going to use it. You are still sexually driven through the ways of Gemini, through the ways of Mercury in your mind. Now, part of the reason why the reason why Mercury-ruled signs, Gemini and Virgo, are not considered good places for Mars is because Mars is an uninhibited animal. It's what we use, it's our connection to our lower base drives. And the only way to really get on top of your base animal instincts is through an instinctive listening to your unconscious libidinal intuition of where your instincts want to go. If you really want to get in tune with your instincts, you gotta get at an instinctive level with them and also be like disciplined on top of it. That's why Mars is exalted in Capricorn. It's actually the best place for Mars is anywhere closer to Capricorn because It's still primal. The Mars is allowing itself to be expressed. But it's Mars in Capricorn knows how to guide the energy in anywhere close to Capricorn. Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. Mars in these places knows how to deal with the nature of the animal body and of the animal motor volition of the muscles. And the muscles express themselves freely in these signs, and because of that, the person learns how to deal with them well. With Mars in Gemini, it's close to Cancer, so it's an erratic expression of the sexuality and of the impulses and of the ambitions. This type of person probably spends a lot of time planning out the perfect thing for their ambitions, the perfect thing for their relationships even, the perfect little plan and schedule for their lives, and they aggressively try to hold on to the plans that they build up and dream up in their heads, and reality gives them something different, and they falter, and they say, whoa, that's not the thing that I had spent so much willful energy planning out. It's a crystallized expression of Mars. Kind of not as much energy as it could have or should have. Also, it loses vitality and ambition and drive because the energy is unwilled. So a lot of energy is spilled on silly things when Mars is in Gemini. Mental things that it thinks about and just can't. It's so planning in its head that it can't just view its immediate reality for what it is. And it even makes it emotional. It overthinks things, and it comes from a place of emotionality because it's so close to Cancer, the debilitation point. Mars is an emotional planet in general anyway, but it can't grasp it. It can't get a grip on it, on its emotions, on its subconscious, and it can't channel them into constructive use in its physical body as easily with Gemini. Now, what this means to sexuality is that the Mars in Gemini kind of like flaunts sexuality. It's a jitterbug energy. There's definitely no lack of nervous system energy here, but it's a little bit wild, a little bit erratic. And you, as a Mars and Gemini person, ought to consider that you just got to learn how to deal constructively with that energy. I recommend in anything in your relationships, when it comes to dealing with your lover, you have needs, you have a nervous system that's probably going to pour out sometimes, and sometimes you're probably just, you don't want to communicate all that clearly. You don't always want to delineate all the plans that you have in your head. It's almost like you lose trust with planning when you have Mars and Gemini. So communication is altered in a funny sort of way. It's like you expect some communication, but you often, with Mars and Gemini, you hope it's like subliminal in some ways and not too specific, even though you do want some kind of communication that's direct and delineated. If it's too direct, then you get frustrated with it because you can't deal with that in yourself. I mean, I'm saying it in this way, you are this and you are that. Just always, you might have Jupiter trine your Mars that helps this out. Or you might have Mercury in a good place. Maybe your Mercury's in Virgo, so it helps to deal with this whole Mercury thing. So don't let me whenever an astrologer says, you feel this way, always consider, I'm just talking about the base elements, right? Configure them in your own mind, whether this base element has absolute truth or is just true enough that you can use it in your life. I digress. This jitterbug energy with Mars and Gemini is here, and it likes to constantly be turning different things all the time. Here, Mars, the general, is trying to express the sun's wants through this airy, mercurial Gemini sign. This Mars likes to make a plan for the bedroom things or for adventure. They like little spontaneous adventures, which often don't turn into satisfying things, because Mars likes to find something solid, secure, and satisfying that they can objectively say that this is good for both of us in this relationship. You know, the Mars in Gemini gets unsatisfied with anything staying too fixed too long, which can be frustrating for everybody. But if your lover has an air ascendant, or an air sun, especially, you know, with Libra, Gemini, or Aquarius, or any sign that jives well with Mercury, Capricorn, Aquarius, Taurus, all of these things will get a certain something out of the capacity for Mars and Gemini, the need for Mars and Gemini to just every now and then just tap on the keyboard and make some craziness happen. There are people who can't appreciate this about you. It's not necessarily always going to be a bad thing. You've just got to consider how your partner, no matter where you are, your life will always appreciate some constructive forms for how you express this nervous energy of yours. And you would do well to think about Capricorn when it comes to your nervous motor functions and muscles, and disciplining your muscles and your energy and your mind. But despite that, you will still probably desire a partner who will give the space for you to every now and then just be like, I know we had this plan to go to like this restaurant today, but I really just feel like sitting in and watching some Japanese manga on Netflix, and like, you want to fuck later or something, like having that kind of sort of craziness in there. You should have a lover who can appreciate that at some level. This is what this Mars does. It's new paths, new neural paths. It's the general here for the sun is in Gemini. And how the general delegates what the sun wants, depending on what the sun is. The sun in this person expresses its soul desires through a Mars, which gains its energy and expresses itself best and most naturally in a constantly turning new neural paths all the time, new ways of thinking, new paths that they've never gone down, new adventurous artistic realms, new senses through their senses, through being like an almost OCD sort of like, I'm going to just go with my will and my mind and just see where this gets me. These kind of things all bring the sun different opportunities, different energies, and help the sun to express itself. So wherever the sun is probably going to get itself, it's going to get its opportunities through what this Mars in Gemini unconscious vibe is going to do. So for better or worse thing, but for you, you've got to deal with it, learn to deal with it, love it, and your partner will love it. You will get a partner, especially if your Venus and your moon are good. You will find a partner who understands this energy and will say, oh, that's just Johnny. He's a little, but I love him, So today we're going to be taking all these readings from this book called Erotic Astrology, The Sex Secrets of Your Horoscope, revealed by Phyllis Vega. Mars in Gemini. In Gemini, Mars energy is scattered and unfocused, and you are prone to erratic mood swings. As long as there are lots of interesting things on your plate, you are a powerhouse of physical energy. But when there's nothing to do, you're easily exhausted, ironically, and bored. However, because this sign produces mental assertiveness, your mental energies are invariably high, which can cause Aries Gemini to seem to be lacking emotionally and just not all that present for the emotional sphere of your partners. Which, just if your partner's not thinking about that either, it's not necessarily such a bad thing. Communication is very important to Gemini. The partner who stimulates you intellectually will spark your romantic and sexual interest. With your Mars in Gemini, you are especially drawn to potential lovers who pique your curiosity and offer you a variety of fresh experiences. In your world, being interesting is much more important than being physically attractive. For you, variety is the spice of life, and your sex drive is fueled by your mind as much as your body. This is the person who would prefer to have someone who can make them laugh rather than someone who is drop-dead gorgeous. Since your intellect is your most active erogenous zone, your style of lovemaking is playful and inventive. Gemini's preferred form of erotic communication is decidedly verbal. Typically, the sociable, vivacious, articulate individuals born under this Mars sign are incurable flirts. You eagerly pursue new interests in love and romance, and you may find it difficult to remain constant to one particular partner. It's always bound to be a thing with Mars and Gemini. They love the skirting the edge of, like, what's appropriate. They just love to flirt with everybody. It's like how the Gemini has this twins thing. They don't know if it's themselves or the other person. Sometimes they speak with the back of their mouth towards the situation or what's going on, and they treat themselves as a couple as the one twin, with everyone else in the world as the other twin. And the flirtation can scoop off into just like everybody, which the partner can enjoy, really. That can be a lovely thing for a partner who is kind of like almost poly in a way. There's a polyamory vibe possible here with this person. Somebody who might enjoy flirting with everything under the sun. But that's not to say, depending on where the sun is especially, it's not to say that they're necessarily promiscuous. Well, they're promiscuous, but they might still... It's still possible for them to want a committed, loving relationship with one person. Depends on all the other things in your chart. Sun in Aries with Mars in Gemini. So now we're going to start going through the 12 sun signs as relates to Mars and Gemini. First thing we're going to talk about is the Sun in Aries with Mars and Gemini. This is a interesting one. The Sun here in Aries really saves a lot of the craziness of Mars and Gemini. The Sun in Aries is the best place for the Sun. It's exalted here. It's got energy, but not too much. It knows how to use it, and the king is looking high-minded, in a high-minded way, at what is best for the self. So this Sun in Aries the Sun might find a way to discipline the Mars. The Sun is sextile to the Mars here, probably. So the Sun in Aries probably has a way of wanting to have a certain discipline. And the Mars in Gemini will have different ways of catering to that. The Mars in Gemini will be constantly, the general finds the resources that the king, the Sun in Aries, needs by twirling its baton and searching and actively, aggressively finding different paths with which to express this sun in Aries nobility of the soul. The sun in Aries wants to do what's best for the sun in Aries. And they'll be very open to different ways of living and expressing their lives and their vitality. You don't want to be too much of a jack of all trades that would make you a master of none. That's not something that sun in Aries necessarily likes. It could be good though, you know? This might even come through romantically and sexually and everything. This person might be a person who likes to have lots of different varieties and techniques of lovemaking for themselves. It's going to come from themselves because the sun is in Aries. What do I best have to give to a lover? Because of the sextile here, it can be a great lover energy, actually. Wildly sociable and endlessly curious. The person with Sun in Aries and Mars in Gemini wants everything in life to be exciting and spontaneous, including sex. And your ideal mate shares your interest in exploring new sexual territory. Since your intellect is your most sensitive erogenous zone, lovemaking begins inside your head, and your sensual body swiftly follows. The Aries Sun person loves the physical contact and everything outside of itself. You like discussing what you want to do or have done to you between the sheets. Although you enjoy sharing ideas with someone special, you value your independence so much that sustaining a long-term relationship can be difficult. There's a stubbornness here with the Sun in Aries, and the independence of Mars and Gemini can also really add and cater to that real independence streak. It can be a rebellious, pushy energy that's not only can they not deal with their own Mars as much as they would like to, but they also can't deal with a relationship constructively, because this Mars and Gemini is just like, how about we just go to the park and just like fly a kite and just like forget about whatever we were just mad at, or just, you know, there's a rebellious individual streak here for sure. Now, Sun in Taurus, Mars in Gemini. The Sun in Taurus now is ruled by Venus. Still very close to Aries, though. The Sun here is close to Aries. The best places for the Sun are like Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. It's the best places for the Sun. Here, the Sun is quite close to Gemini, quite close to the Mars in Gemini. It's sensual. Venus, which rules Taurus, gets along well with Mercury, which rules Gemini. So the general knows what the Sun, the king, is kind of doing and sort of wants. The Mars in Mercury ruled Gemini. The Mars in Gemini knows how to discover. It discovers through its senses what the Sun in Taurus wants. It's like the Sun in Taurus is right behind the fingers of the Mars in Gemini. And the Sun in Taurus values relationships. It values its partners. And it wants to cater to its partners through itself. Because it's close to Aries, remember. It's close to the pole of self-initiation. So the Sun in Taurus, relationships are important to it. The Sun here wants to be affectionate and wants to be respected for the affection it gives, for the loyalty it gives to its partners. And how does it try to keep that affection and loyalty? The general, Gemini, is feeling and tickling and finding all those funny little parts that make the partner, woo, that's a spot. You know, finding all those little bits, finding the little things that the partner likes, the little familiar things, and they'll remember them probably, typically, because of the Taurus and the Mercury vibe here. The Taurus person will desire a long-term partnership with possibly lots of different people, because the Mars in Gemini keeps this wheel turning. Doesn't necessarily, again, doesn't need to be monogamous per se. But when it is monogamous, the Taurus fixedness can even frustrate the Mars in Gemini, twisty-turny, changeability, and mutability. So this person might develop a close relationship with their lover, find out what they like, and find ways of keeping the ball turning. That's what's good about Mars and Mercury having the same rulership. Sun in Taurus, Mars in Gemini. As a romantic partner, you are affectionate, sensual, and exciting. A delightfully verbal and physical lover. You have a knack for turning subtle innuendo and clever quips into masterful tools of seduction. Spicy sexual banter allows you to share whatever you're thinking and feeling with your partner. This helps the Sun express the Venus tones of like affection. You know, not everybody wants to be so sentimental all the time. It's just like when you want your partner to remember little things, or you as Taurus want to express to your partner what you're feeling and thinking. It's important to Taurus. The Geminis, gotta say it, and they're gonna make it funny and witty so that the partner can always like expect. It's a two-way positive. The lover can always expect that when you do express your feelings and thoughts, that it's gonna be like funny and clever and even like deep sometimes. Gemini can be deep despite the surfacey thing. Sometimes the surface reflects a depth, right? Although you relish physical pleasure, there is also a mental component to your sexuality that longs to establish intellectual rapport. You enjoy the stability of a serious relationship, but too much togetherness may make you decidedly uncomfortable. Now, next on the docket, we have Sun in Gemini with Mars in Gemini. This is sort of an interesting thing happening here. Still a good energy for the Sun, because the Sun is still close to Aries, and Mercury is neutral to the Sun. So the Sun is energized by the vibrancy and vitality and jitterbug energy of Gemini in general. Excuse me. There could be a deep, deep, deep fascination with sexuality and just more like vital energy, especially because of the jitterbug Gemini here. This might be a person who has like OCD, or who has like epilepsy, or who has like a deep nervousness that they just they can hardly deal with it, because the Sun is this vital, ardent energy that's just like deeply ambitious to express itself, and being right with Mars, it's opening itself deeply, especially if Mars is combust. If this orb of the conjunction of the Sun and Mars are within like 8 degrees of each other, say, something like that, then the Sun will actually burn Mars and really alter Mars's capacity to do whatever it does as a house lord. Let's say I'm a Leo rising. So for Leo, Scorpio is 4 houses away from Leo, if you're following me. That means as a Leo, if my Sun is conjunct Mars and literally lights Mars on fire because it's so close to it, then my 4th house is going to have trouble, because it's going to be so emotionally driven and potent in it will ruin my 4th house, which Mars rules for a Leo, right? So always consider your ascendant in these things. But I digress. The sun combust Mars will always do this sort of thing, overdriving it, making it actually less capable energetically and muscularly. They might have something in their youth that damages their nervous system or something of this sort. Or they might have trauma with their father or their parents in some way, where their father tells them that you're weak, or that you, or just like, go harder. The father will tell them, like, do this harder. And the Mars in Gemini won't have a grasp of their nervous system yet. And then they'll just, at some point, you've got to dissociate and say, I can't deal with this, and I'm not going to. Dad's yelling at me. This is going to go away soon. I'm just going to freeze until this situation goes away. And then years later, when there's a pressure on the job to meet a deadline, this person might feel like their boss is being like their dad, and the old memory will come through, and they'll like freeze up like that. It's the kind of thing that happens with the sun combusting Mars in a certain way, especially in Gemini, because it's so mental and it gets so frigid. But when they're not combust, if they're still just like with it, like 10 degrees away or more, hopefully the more the better, they're still associated with each other, and there's still a mutual energy thing here that can kind of rattle the Mars even more. But I digress. The sun in Gemini energy, the king wants to explore, and the general is exploring also. So the general, Mars, wants to fulfill the task of the king, and the king does what it does by, it's looking out for the entire country. And being in Gemini, it wants to look out for the best interests of itself through intelligence, through mental volition, through cleverness, through looking at trends in society, through looking at what's right in front of it, through managing its resources effectively and efficiently. And the Mars also wants to do that. So it's almost like the general is like getting in the way of the king in a certain sort of way. It's like the king says one thing, and then the general's like, yeah, that we're gonna do this. And it just can frustrate this person in that way. Sexually, this can even be the same thing. The person with the double Gemini, Sun and Mars person, loves to have the wheel turning, and it's good for the Sun, but it's not necessarily good for Mars. So these people might have a hard time committing to things, committing to appointments with the lover, committing to a single relationship. But even committing to any form of sexuality that's like enduring, you know, they might just not have the capacity to get a deep sexual thing out of their lover. But again, it depends on all the different things in the chart. Sun in Gemini, Mars in Gemini. This double dose of Gemini makes you restless and unpredictable in close relationships. At times, you're so mistrustful of your own emotions that you may try to rationalize them out of existence. In order to hold your love and attention, your significant other must find a way to engage your intellect along with your emotions. Your brain is your most prominent sex organ, and you enjoy sharing thoughts and ideas with your lover, along with your body. Clever verbal foreplay is your forte, and your silver-tongued seduction technique is witty and amusing. For you, sex is mainly fun and games, and not to be taken too seriously. It's just for the fun of it. There's not as much of a need or a necessity to go deep plunging into the other person's soul through sex. They might do it in different ways. Again, you know, you've always got to take all these things in consideration with the rest of the chart. And if you feel like that's not you, you know, don't, you know, or these aspects that we're talking about will probably be there in you. But anybody has the capacity for soul depth if they find other parts of their chart are showing that. And even with all these ill things being expressed here, you got to understand that everybody's got weak points. You've got strengths that you have. And even if there's lots of ugly things in the chart, as I always like to say, I'm a Leo rising, and I always like to consider it a challenge to rise to. All that much more glory to be had for the bad deck of cards you've been given, if you know how to realize it. I always like to say an ill chart is simply an opportunity for magic to be applied. Sun in Cancer, Mars in Gemini. The sun here is starting to move away from its beloved place in Aries. Now here at least the sun is good friends with the moon. The sun loves the moon. Sun loves moon, Jupiter, and Mars the most. Just always trying to reiterate these things. Sun's friends, moon, Mars, Jupiter. That's who the sun loves the most. The moon is adaptive, creative, imagination-driven, inspired, and the sun actually has a lot of energy here. Sun in Cancer is very energetic. This might actually frustrate the Mars in Gemini because there's lots of vital energy, lots of soul-driven energy that's ambitious to do great things for the sake of being great, for the sake of glory, for the sake of it being loved by ones close to it. The Mars in Gemini is probably frustrating for this drive, for this directive. Sun in Cancer person wants to be relied on in a way, and it wants to be reliable, trustworthy. And there's a lot of things about Mars and Gemini that just make them blah. Just, you know, they can be gossips and they can say things that they don't always mean. The Mars is coming up to Cancer here where it's debilitated. So the Mars can be emotionally driven here. And to combine that emotionally, it's not necessarily emotionally driven per se, at least it doesn't think it is. Mars and Gemini might consider it as a very mentally driven person. It's driven towards exploring its mind and curiosity and the things that it wants to go towards. But there is an emotional volition underneath the surface there, whether they know it or not, because the Mars is coming up to its debilitation point in Cancer. The closer Mars is to Cancer, the more subconsciously emotionally driven it is, and the less it can grasp its Marsian instincts because it doesn't learn how to do it. So Cancer Sun is already also a very emotional person. It's driven by a mood. It gets these moods for sure. And when the sun in Cancer personality is in a mood, the Mars in Gemini loses what little tact it has, if there is any. So this person can just get to some gross, undercutting, bad mental spaces, moody mental spaces, where they just want to call themselves just pieces of shit because they just don't know anything. I just can't control myself. But when it's good, it's also good. This is a Sun in Cancer person who can be very adaptive, who can learn a lot about what they're interested in. because the Mars in Gemini is always twirling its baton and finding different ways of doing what the Sun wants to do in Cancer. The Sun in Cancer wants to be adaptive, wants to have a good job, wants to be pliable to their lover, wants to know what their lover needs and to adapt and to be respected for gathering what the lover needs. The Mars in Gemini learns a lot of different ways of doing this because it's always exploring new pathways in this way. This can make for a very emotionally driven, but like tantalizingly explorative lover. These people can explore some moods and explore roles and narratives and finding ways of, I mean, they won't take it too seriously because Mars and Gemini never takes sex too seriously, but they can be a fun, playful lover. Sun in Cancer, Mars in Gemini. While more relaxed than other crabs, you are still subject to the frequent mood swings typical of Cancers. Sometimes it's difficult for you to reconcile the light-hearted, flirtatious side of your nature with your deep emotional need for the security of a permanent love union. Communication is extremely important to you in an intimate alliance. Unlike many members of your sun sign, Cancer, you enjoy expressing your lusty desires verbally with sexy, erotic banter, which is a funny thing for a Cancer. They're usually quiet and reserved, just expressing their affection just through their dissolving surrender. Here, the Mars in Gemini can't let go into that surrender like the Sun in Cancer kind of wants to. They'll hold it back and not take it as seriously as they should. You get off on talking about your own thoughts and feelings, and with your seductive aura and sensitivity to your partner's moods and desires, you can be absolutely irresistible in the bedroom with the way you cater so gracefully and so well to what the other person is trying to perpetuate out there. It really helps to stabilize your moods, to see that you are being sensitive, feeling every little brush of air that your lover is giving out, and to be respected for that. Now, Sun in Leo, Mars in Gemini. Sun in Leo is got tons of energy. When it's close to the summer solstice, the sun has lots of energy, and that's Sun in Cancer. Here in Leo, it's actually also at its Mula Tricona point, which is a Vedic term that means it's full of energy again. And it has lots of energy and vitality to express here. Lots of volition and ambitious sun energy. And it's egoic. This is the type of personality that the Sun in Leo can be egoic. It's not necessarily a bad thing because they see that the self in one is the self in all. Usually a good Leo Sun eventually learns that lesson. And when they fight for what's theirs, when they fight to possess their lover, it comes from a deep sense of a love. Leo wants like a true love vibe. They want to be the lion that's intense and lion-like for this sense of a deeper true love that they want in a lover. Mars in Gemini is a funny thing here because the general is looking to not necessarily go that deep. It's not the best way for Mars and Gemini to express what the Sun in Leo wants here. The Sun in Leo wants to own and possess a lover, but to keep it at a playful, swanky sort of like almost like a fuckboy sort of vibe. It's the only way I can think of it. It's just what's coming to my head. You're not necessarily a fuckboy or a fuckgirl, if you've ever heard that word. It doesn't plunge as deeply as most Sun in Leo ardently want to do, because It's not that it can't. It still will, and it still can. But the Mars here is best when it's like one step behind the lovemaking and thinking like, you know, while their lover might be like, oh my God, I'm just in such a perfect, ardent love with my lover, my person who I just love so deeply. And the sun in Leo hopes that that's there and is feeling that and is just like, oh, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm so there with you. And it might actually be one step behind it, thinking like, I wonder if this person would like this better if I put my leg up here and got this angle here. Let's see how they like that. Or maybe like I'll flip them around and go doggy style and get this like this other side of this energy out. Like I wonder if they'd like that better. Which is not typically, you know, there's a sextile here, which can be groovy. It can be positive. This is probably one of the deeper expressions available to Mars and Gemini. So that's Sun in Leo, Mars in Gemini. They are less dramatic than other Leos. If you have Sun in Leo, Mars in Gemini, you have a laid-back approach to love and sexuality. Your fun and games tactics in the bedroom practically guarantee you and your partner have a good time between the sheets. It's probably a lot more giggling than intense, arduous rogering going on. Essentially more cerebral than emotional. You have a way with words that rarely fails to arouse your bed partner. However, once your strong sex drive takes over, witty sexual banter swiftly gives way to passionate lovemaking. The ability to please as well as be pleased is important to you, and you pride yourself on remembering the little details that make your partner feel truly loved. We can see here the general learns all the little things and details that bring out the lion's feeling like it's a lion to the partner. Leo wants to see its own growling Leo eyes. It's a fiery, ardent, one-pointed passion. It wants to see it reflected in the lover's eyes and to see, wow, for the lover to open their face and go, wow, what is this this beast that I've been so lucky to fall into the lap of. And how the general Mars here keeps that going on is through this little flicks of details of what the person likes, what colors they like, what aesthetic, what tastes, remembering dates and birthdays and these sorts of things. Now, Sun in Virgo, Mars in Gemini. This is a funny square going on here. Both ruled by Mercury, which can be good and bad. Good for each other. The Mars in Gemini helps to flare up and energize the Sun in Virgo. But it's kind of it's funny thing. Virgo's mutability and adaptability, when it comes through the sun, when the sun is its ambition, it wants to be respected for Virgo. And what is Virgo? It's like an ability to be there. The sun in Virgo wants to be reliable, wants to be trustworthy, wants to be able to keep its word, wants to be able to show a long process of the love that I've given to you. Look, baby, this is the proof that I have that I've been loving you all this time. And it wants to be there. It wants to make it so that it can have an ambitious life where it's doing things practical for the family, for the couple. It wants to have a good job and wants to have skills so it can go out and hack at these masterful skills that it's done, and so that it can come back at any time when it needs to with the lover and say, hey, baby, I'm here. I brought us some money. I've got some material affluence that I've been building on. And I'm here for you if you need me for anything. I will fix anything for you. So the Sun in Virgo wants to be reliable in this way. The Mars in Gemini might make it so that there's less, it's mutable, but it's not on the ground. The mutability does not come as an adaptability. The mutability for Mars in Gemini comes as a lack of restraint, a lack of discipline, a lackadaisy attitude towards things. It might forget to be reliable on this day, which could make the Virgo side of this person upset with themselves. But they have to make space for this weird Mars in Gemini that just has to drop the ball sometimes and go on a damn vacation, even if it's like a little day trip for themselves. And just like, I'm going to just go and just find follow this fascinating rabbit wherever it goes. This can come through in the bedroom as like this person who's adaptive and willing to be there for the person, but it doesn't take it too seriously. It's a positive in a way because Virgo can be so self-defeating, so like selflessly surrendering, which we love Virgo for, but it's not the best place for the Sun because the Sun, again, is exalted in Aries. This Sun is very close to Libra. The Sun is losing its ability here to express its real desires, its real noble soul intent, because it wants what the boss wants. It wants what the lover wants. It wants what its partners in relationship and children and family wants. It doesn't always do things for itself. This Mars in Gemini saves a little bit of that by giving it a lighter touch to this surrender that Virgo often does. But it's a frustrating thing because the Sun does still want that. It's a funny catch-22 going on here. This person has to decide whether they want to be that reliable person, and if they do, they got to find some ways to express this erratic Mars and Gemini energy. And the bedroom might be the best place to do it, especially if the lover has like the Sun also in an earth sign and the Mars also in an air sign. Because then in bed, the two of them are spinning the batons and just having all this sort of crazy light fun and playfulness and saying these funny, witty things and erotic banter to each other. But when they come out of it, it's like, all right, darling, now, like, how can I help you in your life actually, So, Sun in Virgo, Mars in Gemini. Although you do adore partying and flirting with all things under the sun, you do require the stability of a long-term love union. While your approach to love and sex may come off as emotionally cool and sort of lighthearted, you have a serious appreciation for the physical joys of lovemaking. So Mercury ruled on both of these, Virgo and Gemini. A skilled lover, you are fascinated with the mechanics and techniques of sexuality. Nevertheless, your approach to the erotic pleasures of the body is earthy, direct, and decidedly unpretentious. Since you are motivated as much by curiosity as by desire, change and variety spice up your love life and keep you interested in bed and out. It's the type of person who might really get off on having a constant erotic interplay going on between themselves and the other person. In a way which can almost be like, these might be the type of people who are like at work and just constantly neurotically like trying to keep something going on the phone, texting their lover with these like getting these little sexy texts. Meanwhile, the lover's at home just like, okay, I got to put on a new dress, a new things to make my titties pop out, to make my man happy at work. And, that can be draining in a funny way because, again, the Mars here is closer to Gemini. It's charged by a need for affection, which can be draining. This person can be draining to the partner because both of these signs are really close to the debilitation point. But if the lover sees it and is also earthy and airy inclined, then they can enjoy it more than it drains them. I mean, draining is a funny thing because sometimes it feels good to get drained, if you know what I mean. This turned out to be a long one. Next we have Sun in Libra, Mars in Gemini. It's a lovely trine going on here. Libra is ruled by Venus. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And these two are friends with each other. Very close friends in the Vedic sense of things. So the Sun gets along with the Mars in a way here. We could say that the general, Mars, is kind of gives the Sun a certain delight with the lightness of its approach. Both of these planets in this position are dangerously, like the Sun is debilitated in Libra. It's the place. So the Sun doesn't have as much, it's not thinking about its own constant inspiration and ambition. It's more thinking about, like, what is my boss like? What does my lover appreciate? Whatever my lover appreciates, I'm going to really assimilate that, and I hope that they're going to hope that the lover caters to their mirroring ways. They're going to have an idea of what they want in a lover and a job and all these things. And it won't necessarily, it'll come from what other people think is lovely, what their mom and dad thought was high-ended. It won't necessarily come from inside the spirit or the soul, because that's where the Sun is in Aries. The Sun is in Aries, it's thinking about itself. When the Sun is in Libra, it's thinking about what other people would find impressive. And the Mars in Gemini here also is not there's a romantic bent here, actually, from the Libra, from the Venus, that is longing for idealistic marriage and the perfect relationship. And the Mars in Gemini here keeps that from being too, heavy and too, it's like this person that can be very light and airy and can throw jabs at their partner and just take things lightly, which can be very cute and fun, because the air here is helping each other out. There's a trine. Mars and the Sun are in a trine here that does give positive energy. So, Sun in Libra, Mars in Gemini. Although you long for a permanent relationship, you can be fickle in your attachments. One part of you wants commitment, another part wants freedom. The Sun in Libra wants the commitment in the marriage contract, but the Gemini Mars wants freedom. Intellectual companionship is as vital to you as romance, and a spirited discussion is as stimulating as a passionate sexual encounter. A delightful mixture of fun-filled companion and romantic partner. You love deeply without taking things all that seriously. While willing to do whatever it takes to make your mate happy, you won't surrender your soul in the process. In the bedroom, your quick wit and fluency with language are your most powerful means of seduction. This sort of juicy capacity to say right what's needed at the right moment can really bring out an erotic strength in this person. Now, for the Sun in Scorpio, Mars in Gemini person, the Sun here leans, this is a kind of a tough bag here, because the sun leans on Mars for its expression. This is kind of like the king and the general are becoming one here, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So what the king, what the sun, the noble aspirations of the personality are to express through things, through its boss, through its company, through its band if it's a musician, or if it's an artist, through its art, through its creative pursuits that it gets going on with other people. And the Mars is going to express its capacity to do that with other people. The Mars is going to show whether this person can essentially hold those aesthetic intermixings with other people. Scorpio fuses itself obsessively with whatever, it puts all its energy and ambition into whatever its beautiful things are that it wants to do. With Mars and Gemini here, it has a hard time sticking and knowing what the sun should be putting the general to task on. The general here, Mars, is trying to enliven the sun, trying to ground the sun, trying to do what the sun wants. Mars is the general, and it does what the sun wants. And how this general, being in Gemini, how the Mars in Gemini does this is by dancing flirtily lightly on its tippy-toe, steppy inspiration, constantly forging new paths, saying what it wants. All these things are not the best thing for a Scorpio sun. It speaks first and thinks later, which is not Scorpio's bag, man. You know, so this is a person who is unapologetically just like has a personality that's like arrogantly gonna say what it wants to say, and it might be filled with the psychic depth of Scorpio. This person might really unnerve, like, wow, you've got a big nose, or just saying demanding things that just seem like arrogant or just like kind of off-putting. And the Mars is just going to express what's on their mind in this nervous energy way, because it's not disciplined. And it might wreck a bit of the sun's ambition, because the sun is leaning on Mars. Since the sun is in Scorpio, it leans on Mars to do its ambitions, and it wants fixed ambitions in Scorpio. It wants to do things that are long-staking. And even in its relationships, the sun in Scorpio wants a long, deep, obsessive Plutonian connection. And the Mars in Gemini just can't take itself seriously enough to really get into what the sun in Scorpio would like to express. Although this person can have a funny, ironic wittiness that some people can definitely love. It can definitely express through a spontaneity that can be beautiful, a spontaneity that's very observant about the partner and about the relationship, and saying, this thing is fucked about our relationship, eh? A person who can take that is someone who has air and water themselves, or even a bit of fire, or can get through this kind of edgy, observational nature of this Scorpio Sun, Gemini, Mars. Sun in Scorpio, Mars in Gemini. You often feel torn between Gemini's love of personal freedom and Scorpio's jealousy and possessiveness. You long for the emotional security of a long-term union, but also crave variety, excitement, and change. Your sexuality is something of a puzzle, even to you. Sometimes sex is uppermost in your mind, and you just can't get enough. At other times, you seem more interested in swapping ideas than kisses. A great communicator. You're as likely to channel your energy verbally as physically. You entice your lover with provocative, erotic suggestions. Then you follow up with the real thing, which is pretty groovy. The Scorpio mind is just like always prodding for some like grittily, cheeky. This could be kinky. This can be a very kinky vibe here. Because the Scorpio will follow through with whatever the Mars and Gemini general just figures out about the lover's deep, dark desires. And the Scorpio, like the Mars and Gemini here is like, you would like that, huh? Oh, I didn't know you were like that. And then the Scorpio starts to take off his clothes and just starts to get into it. Really probably going into the character of whatever was talked about there. Although it's an idealistic trip for these people. They won't get plunged in the soul the way Mars would prefer to, again, because this Mars is light and airy. So it loves probably the Sun in Scorpio has these deep, dark Plutonian desires, and this could be a person who can get a lot of great sexual exploits and adventures out. It's just whether they actually connect with the person in the way that the Sun would like to is another question. If they find the right lover, of course, then they can have all these things tantalized in the right way. Now, Sun in Sagittarius, Mars in Gemini. The Sun in Sagittarius is now getting away from its debilitation point, Libra. It's still close to it, though. So it's still thinking about, like, what does society like? What would society be impressed by me expressing? The Sun does better when it's in Aries, its exaltation point, because then it's thinking about itself, for itself. It knows itself, and it knows how it can cater in sexual ways, in ambitious ways. When it's in Aries, it knows what its best expression of its spirit is. Now, this Sun being in Sagittarius is pretty close to Libra, so it's not necessarily thinking from its spirit, from what it can best contribute to the world. It's more just like ambitious towards what other people have done in history, what its father has done, what has worked for its father or its best friends, and just like, yeah, that's the vibe, man. That's what men are all about, right? This is how you be a good man, is you do this and you do this, and they try to take things, they see things objectively through the Jupiter philosophical framework. It's a bit idealistic, and it's not exactly too close to the bones of what the person necessarily is, although eventually they do figure out what they are. Now here we have the Sun in Sagittarius is opposite Mars in Gemini. It's a funny thing going on there. They can support each other and they can cripple each other. Generally, the Sun opposite Mars is not such a bad thing. They're in each other's sight. They're aspecting each other quite strongly, and thankfully, Sun and Mars are best friends. So, anytime Sun and Mars mutually aspect each other is good, except for the conjunction, because the conjunction, the Sun burns Mars out. Here, Mars is far away from the Sun, but it's still in it's still in an aspect. Even if it's not an exact aspect in the Western sense, by Vedic reckoning, being in opposite signs from each other is bound to have an effect. Although the orb counts. You know, if you're within like an 8-degree orb, this is going to be a really strong thing. So there's a funny. This isn't a bad thing happening here. Although, again, the Sun is quite close to its debilitation in Libra, and Mars is still close to its debilitation in Cancer. So the Mars is kind of emotional here. It's volatile, it's kind of loose, and it doesn't have a grip on Mars, on its mind, on its imaginings, and its looping feedback mechanisms of mind. And Sagittarius also is mutable and adaptable and loves to explore. So this is a person who might have a hard time sticking to one thing, whether it's a relationship or a way of being in a relationship, or their job, their vocation, their ambition, and what have you. It's a lot of mutable energy here. The general Mars is always trying to do what the sun, the king, the sun, wants. The king in Sagittarius doesn't always know exactly what it wants, but it likes to draw a wide compass for, like, what's the best thing for me? What's the best thing for our country? It's what the king wants to know. And it looks like the sun is well placed in Sagittarius because it's good friends with Jupiter. So it can have noble intentions that can bring it out of its self and bring it out into the world where it can see its progress. Mars in Gemini kind of likes what's familiar, actually. The sun, even though the Mars in Gemini does a lot of wandering and trying different things, it's within a familiar framework. It's still very close to Gemini. It doesn't explore the way it would like to, nor does it explore the way the sun would like to. So this is a person who seems like they could be ready for a lot, but they might actually be stubborn in a way, stubbornly unable to solidify their mind, their intentions, and where Mars in Gemini is often the sexy sort of suave, going with the flow, verbal enticer in the bedroom. This particular one might have a really scattered mind, and it can be when it hits, but when it misses, it's way out, and it's often way out. It might be about 50-50 with regards to the sun being aware of what the other person is, of what they are, what their sexuality is. I'm a man, you're a woman, or whatever the thing is, I'm a man and you're a man for homosexuals. And so I'm this and you're that, and I'm going to try to explore within what I believe is this thing that we've got as this particular form. And they'll explore very deftly within that form and even try to go outside of it. And they don't know if they're coming or going, It makes it less, that spinning pot can be nice no matter what. But the familiarity, finding something that works can be quite nice too. Some solid thing. These people kind of lose the capacity to do that, but Mars does enliven the sun because of the opposite aspect. The sun is enlivened. It does learn more about the world because of the spinning nature of Gemini. It does. It just might not be as expansive as the sun truly wants, and it might even be emotionally driven. And it might, whatever the sun does discover through this opposition to Mars, it will discover a lot. But whatever it does discover, it'll have a hard time actually going anywhere with it. Sun in Sagittarius, Mars in Gemini. You are constantly on the lookout for new challenges and adventures. And you believe variety is the spice of life. I've got to have nose hair that's driving me bonkers. Whatever, I'll deal with it later. Sorry about that. Sun in Sagittarius, Mars in Gemini. You are constantly on the lookout for new challenges and adventures, and you believe that variety is the spice of life. This includes relationships where you may garner a reputation as something of a romantic gypsy. Since you harbor a relaxed attitude towards love and companionship from the Mars and Gemini, too much intimacy or emotion tends to scare you off. Yet, despite your freewheeling nature, you remain devoted to your family and close friends. In the bedroom, you pride yourself on spontaneity and creativity, and innovative, experimental sex is your forte. You're game to try just about anything at least once. This particular person can probably do lots of exploring. Probably lots of fun stuff. You know, they go right out of their comfort zone if they feel like that's what's going on right now. You know, like, is that what we're doing? All right, let's do it. Yeah, there's a lot of creativity and spontaneity available for that particular combination. Why is my nose so itchy? Just end it. Okay, folks, moving right along. This is Sun in Capricorn, Mars in Gemini. This is somebody, the Sun is in dense Capricorn here. It's very thoughtful, likes to have long-standing. I mean, the Earth and air do typically work well together. Capricorn's ruled by Saturn. The Gemini, the Mars in Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. And Saturn and Mercury are very good friends. They're best friends. There's sort of a triangle there between Mercury, Saturn, and Venus. So the Sun here does jive to a certain degree with Gemini in the sense of it can be the Mars here is not exactly practical, but the Sun in Capricorn does learn a lot about what it wants to be known as being practical. And the Sun in Capricorn, thankfully, helps to add a bit of discipline to the Mars. A little bit of single-pointed drivenness and purpose and meaningfulness in anything that the Mars in Gemini tends to not grasp on. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So for the Sun to be in Capricorn, it adds a little bit of a delightful thing for Mars, no matter what. So, in this combination, we could see that the Capricorn will hold a certain possessiveness, perhaps, towards their lover, but also they want to be respected for their utility. And the Mars in Gemini has a way of figuring out through the twirling of their baton and their tap dancing and just like, what is it that you really like, and their spontaneity, figuring out what the partner likes and giving it to them in a regimented, rigid way through the Sun in Capricorn. Mind you, Capricorn won't just live for their lover. They've got a lot of their own stuff going on. There's a rebellious, individualistic streak in this person. But the Mars in Gemini does help them to learn how to best give it to the lover, to whoever it is that they're loving. And it won't be too vanilla. Capricorn can be a little bit vanilla. The Gemini might spice it up with its own funky sort of out-of-the-box ways of being. Although possibly not. Let's see what our book says. This is Sun in Capricorn, Mars in Gemini. You are ambitious, hardworking, and clever. And your fine mind, quick wit, and gift for gab make attracting potential suitors easy. In an intimate union, you are warm and loving physically, but you may be emotionally inhibited, especially with the Gemini Mars here. It's the general is trying to express Capricorn, the Sun. The general Mars is finding different neural paths in different ways. And it's just mind is just, it has a punch to the mind, Mars being in Gemini. Because Gemini is its own space, and it relates to our ability to hold cerebral conversations and even just to be sensitive to the other person. Mars being here is so driven that it can miss cues and emotional cues from the other person. You are more comfortable talking about difficulties than dealing with the feelings that they engender. And they will be inclined to talk about difficulties. And when the person that they're talking to about shows emotions and feelings, they're kind of like, yeah, I get it, I sympathize, but just here's a tissue, just stop that for 1 minute and just like, let's deal with the problem. Meanwhile, the other person's like, you asshole. Nevertheless, with a partner that you trust, you reveal the passionate, randy side of your nature. You can take great pride in your sexual prowess, and your bedroom is the perfect place for lusty lovemaking. Yeah, the Capricorn always has a certain driven energy, a vitality, shall we say, that doesn't come from within itself. It's just a driven will. And when they have the will to really give it to someone, they will. And the Gemini here keeps it all from being, keeps it from being too dry, which Capricorn can have a tendency to be a little bit dry and sort of just vanilla, like I said, and boring. The Gemini will be like, like this bedroom thing is like what we're up to right now. It's what is on their mind. Now, next, we have another trine. We have Sun in Aquarius with Mars in Gemini. So this trine is rock and roll. Again, we have Saturn, just like with Capricorn. The Sun in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, Aquarius being ruled by Saturn. And Gemini, where this Mars is ruled by Mercury. We know that Saturn, Mercury, and Venus are best friends. That comes from Vedic reckoning. Notice, for you Westerners, that the Earth and air signs are all ruled by Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. Hello. And so it's natural that this would be a trine, Aquarius and Gemini. The Sun in Aquarius here desires to be a leader amongst others. This is a cool vibe here. The Sun is coming closer. This is almost like the best possible Sun for a Mars and Gemini person. It is. It totally is. Because the Sun now is in Aquarius. It's almost at Aries again. And Aries is where the Sun is exalted. So the Aquarius here doesn't mind being a little bit hard to others in order to glorify itself. It comes from a Aquarian, like a transcendental sense of what's best for everybody. And they're usually not wrong on it. They have a good sense of this. Aquarians are made for that sort of looking outside themselves and seeing the bigger structure, the bigger picture. What's best for the company, what's best for the hippie group of people living together in a commune. You know, it's that Aquarian vibe. And they're good leaders. And in order to be a good leader, you have to be able to delegate. You have to say, I know what you are best at, and I know what you are best at. I think you should work together to do this. I think the team should put these resources here. Aquarius is this kind of leader, typically. They're very practical, functional, utilitarian. And Mars and Gemini will learn all these different ways of how to make the Aquarian material world gears turn all that much better. The Aquarius sun who has Mars in Gemini will always be informed about what they are dealing with in their personal project, working on their motorcycle, or their job, or their business, or in their relationship. The Mars in Gemini is just going to get right in there, and it's kind of fearless about hacking at the desires of the Aquarius sun. In fact, they energize each other because of the trine happening here. If you don't think about the signs and you just think about aspects, you'll note that there's a trine happening here. Even if in the Western sense, the deep trines happen when they're like close to 8 degrees of a trine. You know, if Aquarius 16 degrees and Gemini Mars at like 13 degrees. That's within 3 degrees of each other. The sun and the Mars, there's a trine. That's the Western sense of a trine. But even if they're just in the same sign together, the rulerships of the two are still blending in a positive fashion. Saturn and Mercury. So the Saturn mind wants to be functional, and the Saturn learns the general Mars in Gemini is constantly finding new ways of enlightening the ambitious material world framework desires of the sun in Aquarius. And they're light. It's nice to have a boss. Aquariuses are often bosses. Or just this self-driven dude. You know, the Aquarius dude. I do it like I'm my own person. And the dude factor really comes out with this Mars and Gemini. Because they just say what they want when it comes to their mind. And when they have something that they need to delegate, they have a way of being light about it. Telling their buddy, like, you know, Mars in Gemini is light on its feet and can just say, like, look, man, like, everyone eventually learns that this is the type of person who's going to say what's on their mind. And when they do say what's on their mind, it's not really ego-driven per se, although anybody can be ego-driven. It's just coming from, like, this is what needs to be said. So for better or worse, sometimes they can be very hard, and it can be ego-driven for them to make fun of people. You know, they like to make fun, and let's get a laugh, you know, and they'll even do pranks and stuff like that. And they might get all this with their lover as well. This same sort of, like, volatile, like, energy, or they might even, like, demean the other person for having a gender, or like something like that, you know, or like if it's a girl, you know, this combination has lots of masculine traits, and if it's a girl, they'll expect the man to be like, I'm the man and you're the woman, and, you know, like a woman belongs in the kitchen, or some kind of, like, I don't know, weird thing like that. The woman would be like, ah ha ha, very funny, I'll show you. And they love that interplay, you know? This is both genders interacting in that way with any lover would probably be a cool thing. Sun in Aquarius, Mars in Gemini. Despite being a zealous, exhilarating, creative lover, you tend not to take lovemaking too seriously. Sex for you is mainly fun and games. In bed and out, you thrive on variety and experiment, low tolerance for dull sexual routine. More verbal than sensual. Words stimulate your physical desires in ways that even the most erotic touching cannot accomplish. It's the thought, it's the narrative, it's the interplay of minds, and even the fun sort of like pushing each other. The more you talk about what you'd like to do or have done to you, the more sexually turned on you become. You're quite comfortable discussing sex, yet you clam up when it comes to talking about feelings and emotions. Not exactly the forte of this very airy individual. Now, on to the next. Here we have Sun in Pisces, Mars in Gemini. And this is a square happening here. The Mars is at the forward square of the Sun. Thankfully, the Sun here is one of the best places for the Sun. It's right next door to Aries, its exaltation point. And it's in Pisces, which is ruled by Gemini. The Sun is in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is one of the best friends of the Sun. Westerners take note. Notice that Sun, Aries, Sun, Jupiter, and Mars are all fire signs. In fact, the moon is even considered a part of this best friend triad because all of the fire and water signs are ruled by either Sun, Moon, Mars, or Jupiter. Think about it. It's a very important thing that Westerners miss out on. So the Sun being in a Jupiter-ruled sign, Pisces, Sun always does well in water and fire signs for the reason I just said. And it's close to Aries as well, which is its exaltation point. Here the Sun is thinking of, first, how can whatever I am dealing with relate to what I am intrinsically? The Sun does great in Aries because it's thinking of its intrinsic self and how it's going to relate to its immediate surroundings. When the Sun is in Libra, it's thinking about it's molding itself to other people, and it loses the spirit of itself. When it's closer to Aries, like here, it's spiritizing itself with whatever it does. It's ennobling itself in whatever it does and whatever it touches. In Jupiter ruled Pisces, the Sun is thinking about how it can enliven itself with everything it does through cultural tropes of Jupiterian wisdom and logic. It listens to what mom and dad says, and it, unlike Sagittarius, Sagittarius lives for trying to make mom and dad happy, living vicariously through the hopes of mom and dad or through society, what others think they would like them to be. In Pisces, the Sun sees all this glory and wants to satisfy itself through the eyes of others, but for its own sake first. It has to do what it feels is best first. So it can be very sensitive. Everything is expanded through the Jupiter rulership here. Being square to Mars here is an interesting thing. Mars isn't doing well in Gemini in general, like we talked about, because it's close to its debilitation point, but it's really saved by the Sun here. The Sun really gives this person the capacity to, the capacity to grasp ambitious things that it wants to do and really push, even though the nervous system is roiling and boiling and has a hard time gripping anything and coming to grips with anything. The Sun in Pisces will find that out and figure that out and find something to do with itself that caters to that Mars and even still gets it disciplining itself a little bit. Although there is a lot of adaptability here that's almost too much adaptability. The mutability, the Sun and the Mars are mutable. And it might be tough for the Mars here, being square the Sun. It might be really tough for this Mars to get anything going, and holding it steady. Any process of the mind, the skills that Mars and Gemini might typically want to learn, the ambitions that the Sun and Jupiter might have, there might be so many, and it might be a jack of all trades, master of none. And that's the best way to describe this. They will be a jack of all trades. They will be a jack of some trades. The Pisces will drive them to have some kind of usefulness to others, to culture, to society. It's just that they will have to deal with this twirling baton of Mars and Gemini that is tap dancing and doesn't always like to stay in one place. And erotically speaking, this can be a juicy thing because Sun in Pisces already knows how to be kind of light, but it's very sensitive. This combination is almost too sensitive. And Sun in Pisces would prefer to go deeply into love, usually. It wants to so fully surrender itself and engulf itself in a river of affection and adoring devotional passion to whatever it's putting itself towards. The Gemini here is one step behind that. Not letting it go too, not letting themselves dunk themselves head first in the river, but like dipping a toe in and being like, ooh, that's nice. And like even sexually, when they're dealing with their partners, they may be one step behind everything, which can be for good or bad. It's just this is the nature of this person. If you have a lover who wants to go fully deep all the time, you know, who's like Sun in like Cancer and like Mars or Moon in like Taurus or whatever, the lover will want to go deep, 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 deep. And the Mars and Gemini of this Pisces will kind of be like, you're making a funny face when you come. Do you know that? And they'll be like, oh, gosh, shut up. You know? That's the kind of vibe that can come through here. But for someone who has air and water, just like this person does, that can be funny. That can break tension in a way that people can enjoy, you know? It can be a cute, hilarious, cute thing. Every aspect can be looked at as positive from the right person's vantage. So this is what our book says about Sun in Pisces, Mars in Gemini. Sociable, outgoing, and witty. You want a partner who provides intellectual stimulation along with love and companionship. Even though you yearn for the grounding of a stable union, a part of you fears commitment. It's the double mutability going on here. They're so airy and watery, too, that it would be nice to have a partner who can ground them. But they also don't want that at the same time. It's a frustrating catch-22 for these people. In the bedroom, you are sensual and alluring, a skillful lover and compulsive charmer. Your technique is a mixture of tenderness and sexual expertise. You have few inhibitions, and you dislike having your activities confined to a specific time or place. Sexy talk turns you on, and your idea of great foreplay combines kissing and stroking with lively, flirtatious sexual banter. It's like a constant giggling and like, it's like a baby that's super sensitive to the touch. It's like, and they like to just talk about different things. Oh, you would say that, and just constantly just like all this sort of different touching and stuff. Which can be really nice and juicy. I could see that being really nice. Yeah, folks. Thank you for watching. If you've been watching so far, my name's Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Stay tuned for whenever I put out the next thing. We're going to be listening to Mars in Cancer. Thanks a lot.